She should have known the moment they walked in. Boots thudding heavy, voices sharp and too loud for a small-town diner. "This ain't a place for wheels," one of them scoffed, the words slicing through conversation like a broken bottle. Laughter followed, then a cruel hand tipped her wheelchair just enough to send it rolling sideways into the edge of a booth. Forks clattered to the tile. A mug shattered inches from her foot. She didn't say a word, didn't cry out, but a kid near the window saw everything, and so did his dad. Exactly 30 minutes later, the diner's front lot crunched under thick tires. A military green SUV pulled up. 3 Marines stepped out, and the whole place fell into silence like someone had flipped a switch. Grace Torres always sat in the far left corner of the Ridgeway diner, right beneath the clock that never ticked right, always 5 minutes behind. The place was old school, stiff booths, hot coffee that scalded your tongue, and the smell of fried eggs clinging to everything. But Grace liked that. Predictable, safe, familiar. Her U.S. Marine Corps pin rested on the collar of a worn-out flannel shirt as she wrapped silverware into napkins with the same careful rhythm she'd used in combat zones. The owner kept her shifts. Light, midday, nothing too taxing. She didn't complain, didn't need to. At 45, Grace had seen more than most. 2 tours overseas, 1 explosion that left her with a missing leg, a hardened jaw, and more memories than she cared to revisit. The wheelchair creaked each time she moved, but it was honest. More honest than the prosthetic she rarely wore. Her hands were rough, but graceful, deliberate, steady. You didn't expect that from someone who'd been through so much. Still, Grace found comfort in her routines. Roll, fold, place, again and again. The repetition kept her breathing steady. Most days, it was enough. People at the diner usually left her be. A few offered quiet nods. Some avoided looking altogether, like her injury made them unsure of what to say. Grace never minded. She wasn't here for attention, just to stay grounded. A weathered wallet in her jacket held 1 photo, her squad, before things went bad. Everyone smiling, her especially. That picture hadn't been out in years. She never needed to see it. Until today. Because today, the calm she'd built carefully, piece by piece, was about to be shattered. The door burst open so hard, the napkin dispenser rattled on the counter. 3 men stomped in, loud and aggressive, each wearing black leather vests splattered with patches, names like Goose, Tank, and Blade stitched across their backs. Their laughter came first, loud, raw, and meant to dominate the room. Grace didn't react, but her senses shifted as if her training had been waiting for this moment. The leader, Tank, had shoulders too broad for his jacket and a smirk that made every sentence feel like a dare. He locked eyes with her almost instantly. "Well, look what rolled in," he sneered, jabbing his buddy. "Straight from the VA," Goose chuckled. "Nah, man, that's G.I. Jane, probably just fishing for sympathy tips." Grace kept folding napkins, each one placed down with precise control. She'd heard worse in war zones. Verbal jabs didn't sting the same. But in places like this, where no one spoke up, insults came with a different kind of weight. Blade slammed himself onto a stool and started hitting the bell like it owed him money. "Yo, someone getting us menus or what?" Grace wheeled over, voice calm, posture set. "Would you gentlemen care for today's special?" she asked flatly. Tank leaned back. "Sure thing, Sergeant Shortstack," he said, dragging out each word like a joke. "Why don't you roll that attitude on over?" His voice bounced across the diner like a threat. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps us keep making stories like this. Goose snorted. "Ain't there some rule about food safety? Pretty sure wheelchairs break health codes." A couple sitting nearby shifted, then stayed quiet. The waitress at the register looked up, then immediately focused on a spotless sugar jar like it held secrets. Grace didn't answer. She just placed their menus down, 1, 2, 3, knife, fork, napkin, like nothing had happened. "You guys don't got kitchens at the VA?" Tank muttered as she turned. Behind her, one of them scoffed. Blade spread, out like he owned the counter, legs wide, back slouched. "Maybe she's training for combat," he grinned. "Lesson 1, take the abuse and keep rolling." The tension grew thicker. Grace moved to refill the coffee pot. Her hands stayed, focused. Her body stayed steady. Then Tank spoke again. "Never understood why they let women into combat," he said loud enough for everyone. "They slow the whole operation down." Goose added, "Bet she sat behind a desk, typing emails, calling it war." Grace didn't flinch, didn't turn, but Blade stood up and followed, drunk on power. "Hey, soldier girl, you deaf or just rude?" he asked, stumbling closer. Grace glanced back, not scared, just assessing. He grabbed the handles of her wheelchair. No warning, just yanked. Hard. The chair hit the leg of a nearby table. Her tray flew. A hot splash of coffee hit her arm. A fork bounced across the floor. Then came the sound that cracked the room, the thud of her body hitting the tile. Her right leg twisted, the prosthetic bent wrong. Sharp pain shot through her side, and everything stopped. The entire diner froze. A busboy holding a tray of glasses stood like a statue. The waitress at the counter gasped, her hand still gripping a coffee pot mid-air. A couple near the back stared blankly into their half-eaten pancakes. No one moved. No one helped. Blade laughed first, but it wasn't the loud kind anymore. It was quieter, meaner. He was satisfied. So were Tank and Goose. On the ground, Grace didn't say a word. Her palms pressed into the cold tile. Hot coffee seeped into the denim of her jeans, soaking through. Her wallet had spilled next to her, and from it slid a photograph, folded, creased, and well-loved. It showed her and her unit lined up in the scorching desert sun. Bold marker ink across the back read, "She carried us every damn time." Grace didn't cry. She never did, but the air in the diner had turned thick and oppressive, like silence had weight. She slowly started pushing herself up. Not out of weakness, but because she'd done it 1,000 times before. The pain in her hip was real, but her discipline was stronger. Her hands found the wheels. Her face stayed hard, unreadable. No one came over. No one dared. Tank muttered something about military freeloaders under his breath, but nobody responded. Grace grabbed her chair, flipped it upright, and pulled herself back in with mechanical efficiency. She didn't check her soaked shirt, didn't fix her hair, just sat tall, staring forward like she'd just come out of a war zone. Her marine pin gleamed through the coffee stain on her chest. A crumpled napkin stuck to one wheel, but she didn't reach to pull it off. She didn't bother. Over by the window, a little boy, maybe 9 or 10, sat frozen, staring at her with wide, unmoving eyes. "Dad," he whispered, barely audible, "is that lady a soldier?" His father, a rugged man in a camo-lined jacket and a ball cap worn from years of use, turned to look. Patches along his sleeve told a story of their own. Desert Storm, 2nd, Marine Division. He didn't answer immediately. He just watched Grace. Her hands, her jaw, the coffee-soaked sleeves, and that fallen photo by her side. Then he said softly, but clearly, "Yeah, Tommy, she's the real deal." The man stood without a word, calm, quiet. He walked to the front door, stepped outside, and pulled out his phone. The gravel beneath his boots crunched under the weight of purpose. He stared across the small town road, now quiet in the fading afternoon light. "Yeah," he said, his voice low but steady. "This is Sergeant Daniels. I've got a situation I think you need to hear." A short pause. "No, it's not an official report. Civilian setting, but it involves one of our own." Another pause. "You're going to want to send a unit. Trust me." Inside, Grace had returned to her table, adjusting her sleeve as if nothing had happened. She moved with the kind of calm that came from years of training. Her hands brushed her lap gently, fingers briefly touching the fabric over her chest, right above her heart. She had no idea that help was already on the way. But outside, the call had already gone through. 30 minutes ticked by slowly. The bikers grew louder again, like nothing had happened. Tank waved for another cup of coffee. Goose twirled a butter knife on his fingertip. Blade leaned so far back in his seat his boots hung off the edge of the next table. They laughed again, but it was thinner now, like the edge had dulled. Grace stayed silent. She didn't fold napkins anymore. She didn't serve. She just sat, still and upright, like someone holding a storm inside and refusing to let it loose. The photo had been tucked back into her wallet. The coffee stain had dried in patches across her clothes. But the atmosphere in the room, something about it felt different now, as if the wind was about to shift. Then came the sound, tires crunching slow and heavy over gravel. Not a sedan, not a pickup. No, this was different. The kind of sound that made people stop mid-conversation. A military SUV rolled into the lot, matte green and unmistakable. Dust swirled behind it as it came to a complete stop in front of the diner. The engine didn't turn off. The vehicle just waited, humming low like a warning. The diner fell silent. Forks paused mid-air. A waitress stopped halfway between tables. All eyes shifted to the door. It swung open with calculated precision. 3 Marines stepped in, uniforms. Sharp, presence louder than words. The first was a barrel-chested master sergeant with silver hair and a limp he made look dignified. He carried a cane, not as a crutch, but as a weapon of posture. His eyes scanned the room like he was reading a battlefield. Behind him came a young corporal, tall, clean-cut, rolling an empty wheelchair behind him. The third figure was a female, Marine captain, her uniform heavy with ribbons and medals that caught the light with each step. Her jaw was tight, her eyes sharp, and her silence said more than any entrance ever could. Even the loudest voices quieted. Goose lowered his knife, blade straightened without realizing it. Tank blinked in confusion, like he couldn't quite register what he was seeing. The 3 Marines walked straight to Grace's corner booth. The Sheen Master Sergeant stopped at her table. He didn't smile, he didn't ask, he simply stood tall and saluted. "Staff Sergeant Torres," he said, his voice equal parts gravel and authority. "Apologies for our delay." Grace's arm moved instinctively, returning the salute with crisp perfection. For the first time that day, her face changed. Her eyes didn't soften, but they lit up. Not from fear, from recognition, from respect. Around her, the diner was absolutely still. The moment held, heavy and still, like the whole diner was holding its breath. The 3 Marines stood like statues, boots planted, uniforms pristine, the kind of presence that didn't demand silence. It owned it. The female captain took one measured step forward. Her eyes didn't move from Grace. Her voice was calm, but every word struck with weight. "We were alerted by one of our own," she said. "He reported that a decorated Marine was publicly humiliated on civilian grounds." She scanned the room, slowly, deliberately, until her gaze landed on the corner booth where Tank, Goose, and Blade sat. No more laughter now. Tank's jaw locked tight. Goose dropped his stare to the floor. Blade shifted, suddenly uncomfortable in his own skin. The captain didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "That report included physical contact," she said plainly. Grace shook her head gently, trying to diffuse it. "It's fine," she whispered. "Not worth all this." But her words didn't carry far, and the Master Sergeant didn't budge. "With all due respect, Staff Sergeant," he replied, louder now, so the entire diner could hear, "this isn't nothing. No one lays a hand on one of ours. Not in the field, not in peace, not ever." The younger Marine stepped forward, eyes locked on the bikers, voice steady but personal. "Staff Sergeant Torres led our unit through Fallujah," he said. "She pulled 3 men out of a burning Humvee. I was one of them." Grace turned toward him slowly, squinting like a face from a long time ago had suddenly come into focus. "Private Jenkins?" she asked, her voice soft but surprised. He nodded. "Corporal now, ma'am, because of you." For a moment it was just the two of them. Recognition passed between them like a current. Near the window, the young boy named Tommy stood. His father, the man who had made the call, rose beside him. Their eyes met Grace's. No words were spoken, just a silent nod. Then, almost as if on cue, an elderly man wearing a Korean War veteran cap stood from a booth near the kitchen. He raised a slow, silent salute. A woman near the door followed, placing her hand over her heart. Two others in National Guard jackets, previously invisible in the crowd, stood at attention. One by one, more people rose. Some saluted. Some simply stood tall. But the message was clear. A room that once looked away now stood in complete, unified respect. At their booth, the bikers no longer smirked. Goose sat slouched, trying to make himself small. Tank stared at the table, avoiding everyone's gaze. Blade didn't say a word. For the first time since walking in, he looked like he wanted to disappear. They didn't own the room anymore. Grace did, without raising her voice, without standing from her chair. Her presence was enough. A week passed. The diner had changed. The old rusted sign above the door was replaced with a fresh wooden one, navy blue paint, clean lettering. It now read, "Homefront Cafe, where respect is always on the menu." Inside, small changes told a bigger story. One wall now displayed framed photos of local veterans, names, units, service dates. Some wore dress blues, others fatigues, all wore pride. The booth where the bikers had once sat, it stayed empty, no sign, no rule. Just a quiet agreement among regulars. Some chairs weren't meant to be filled. Grace still worked the lunch shift, still folded napkins with quiet grace, but now she wore her Marine Corps pin outside her shirt, not tucked in. A small American flag patch was taped to the back of her chair, faded from the sun but impossible to miss. Customers greeted her now. Some thanked her, others nodded respectfully. Most stopped for a second longer than before, their eyes lingering. On a new plaque above her table, "Reserved for those who served." All gave some gave more. Dave, the diner's manager, the same one who had frozen behind the counter the day of the incident, wore a pressed shirt now. He'd even started wearing a tie with a tiny flag pin clipped to the collar. That same week, he hired 2 more veterans, one to cook in the back, another to run weekend shifts. Melissa, the young waitress, began asking Grace about military ranks between customers. She could now tell the difference between Captain Bars and Sergeant Stripes. She also knew which questions not to ask, lessons Grace passed on gently. The Marines came back every Thursday, like clockwork, same SUV, same parking spot, Master Sergeant Wilson, Captain Rodriguez, Corporal Jenkins. No big announcements, no speeches. They just sat at Grace's booth, shared coffee, shared silence, and sometimes a quiet memory. What started as one cruel moment turned into something bigger, a transformation, a diner rebuilt, a town reminded, a woman made visible again. Grace didn't smile often, but when she did, like when Jenkins told half-true stories about the desert, it showed all the way in her eyes. That quiet kind of joy that doesn't ask for attention. It just exists, solid, earned. One afternoon, as the Montana sun dipped behind the hills, the front door opened again. A young man stepped in. Barely 19, fresh haircut, stiff new army uniform, his cap clutched nervously in both hands. He didn't know where to stand, whether he belonged. Grace spotted him right away. She rolled forward without hesitation, the flag on her wheelchair catching the soft orange glow from the window. "First deployment?" she asked gently. He nodded wide-eyed. "Shipping out tomorrow morning, ma'am." She pointed to the empty seat at her table. "Sit down. Coffee's okay, but the company's solid." He hesitated. I don't want to intrude." Grace smiled, a slow, calm kind of smile. "You're not intruding, soldier. You're continuing a tradition. The young soldier eased into the seat across from Grace, still unsure, still clutching that cap like it held. All the nerves in the world. Around the room, eyes turned, but not in judgment, in recognition. Sergeant Wilson, seated beside Grace, lifted his coffee cup silently. A quiet salute. No words, just a gesture that spoke volumes. One by one, other veterans around the cafe mirrored him. A former Navy medic near the window, a retired Air Force mechanic sitting near the kitchen. Even the old Korean war vet raised his mug, his hands trembling ever so slightly, but his spine straight as ever. No one spoke. They didn't need to. The message was clear. You're seen. You belong. And you'll never be left behind. Since that day, the town had changed, not with fanfare, but with small, meaningful shifts. Grace had been asked to speak at the local high school assembly. She didn't talk about combat, not about medals or missions. She spoke about discipline, about carrying your team when they can't walk on their own, about showing up day after day, even when the world forgets your name. Her voice was quiet, but the auditorium had never been more still. Local businesses started offering discounts to veterans. No signs, no advertising, just quiet acknowledgements written on receipts or passed through handshakes. A new memorial was approved by the town council, a single slab of black stone placed in the center of the square. Simple words engraved in silver. To those who served with dignity, and to those who stood with them. As for the bikers, Jack, Blade, Goose, their names disappeared from town talk. Rumors floated that Jack lost his job, something about a video, something about unbecoming conduct in public. Grace never asked. She had more important things to focus on, like mentoring a young female recruit who stopped by for coffee every Sunday, asking about boot camp, or the Vietnam veteran who finally wore his medals again after 40 years of silence. Outside the diner, the same green SUV still pulled up every Thursday evening. Same dust trail, same quiet parking. One day, a note was taped to the passenger window, handwritten in block letters. We always come back for those who never quit. Grace saw it once. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Inside, the cafe always smelled of fresh coffee and something warm from the grill. Customers came and went, but a quiet sense of honor lingered in the air. It wrapped around the space like sunlight on a cold morning, gentle but impossible to ignore. And at her usual table near the slow-ticking clock, Grace Torres sat with her marine pin gleaming, her wheelchair's flag gently shifting with each breeze, and the quiet knowledge that she was no longer alone. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and let us know your favorite moment in the comments.